The woman they forgot to fear. I wasn't fired. Not really. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no box of personal items escorted to the curb. There wasn't even an email. What there was a calendar invite. Subject: Strategic Team Realignment, Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Location: Conference Room D. The one with the flickering light, the fake fern, and the chair that always smelled like mildew. No agenda, no attachments. I'd worked at Weston Materials for 26 years. My name's Alina Price, Senior Formulation Chemist, R&D, 10 patents, and exactly 0 warnings. But I knew. You don't get pulled into a 3:30 Thursday meeting unless someone's about to hand you a mug of decaf and a bullet between the eyes. Metaphorically, of course. In corporate terms, it's a sunset. In human terms, it's an execution. That morning, I ran my batch tests like I always did. Same gloves, same protocols, same compound I'd built from the ground up, an industrial adhesive used in bridges, wind turbines, and military-grade aircraft. They called it W88. I just called it mine. I never wrote the formula down, not in full, not in the way they wanted, not in some cloud drive or software the interns could fumble through. It lived in me, in my hands, in the way the mix sounded when it hit the flask, in the smell, a sharp, sour note that told me whether the polymer chains were aligned or breaking apart like lies under pressure. They never noticed how often I fixed it. Quietly, behind the numbers, they only saw success. And now they wanted to sell that success without the woman who invented it. At 3:28, I walked into conference room D. Trevor, the new VP of Ops, sat at the head of the table. 34, MBA from Kellogg. Never wore the same Patagonia vest twice. His smile said startup, but his eyes said spreadsheet assassin. Beside him was Alyssa from HR. Eyeliner too neat. Voice soft like apology music. Ilana, Trevor said, as if we'd gone hiking once. First of all, thank you. Ah, there it is. Your work here has been incredible. You've built things that make this company what it is. So why am I here? He blinked. You know how markets shift, how we're leaning into a more agile, scalable model. We need to empower a new generation of thinkers. Alyssa slid a white envelope across the table. It was light, like insult. Inside a severance offer, a release clause, and a request, maybe you can do a brief transition period with Mason. He's sharp, Trevor added. Fresh out of Stanford. Double major. Great instincts. I looked at them both. They were smiling like they'd just cut a ribbon. But they'd cut me. I placed my badge on the table, took the envelope, then said the only true thing in that room: you didn't fire me. You just reminded me what I'm worth. And I left. Not one of them asked about the formula. They assumed it was already theirs. That was their first mistake. Quiet is a loaded weapon. I didn't cry. Not when I turned in my badge. Not when I walked past the lab. Not even when I saw Mason, my replacement, already touring my space, flanked by interns who looked barely old enough to rent a car. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. They'd already decided I was irrelevant. The next morning, I didn't wake up to an alarm. No safety goggles. No clock in. No batch sheets. No underpaid, over-perfumed assistant asking what phase shift meant. Instead, I brewed strong coffee, wrapped myself in a wool sweater, and sat on the porch of the small house I'd inherited from my aunt. The air smelled like pine and firewood. Not chemicals, not stress. I didn't check my email. I deleted LinkedIn. I disappeared. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Brenda, the last quality control tech at Weston with a brain and a backbone. She didn't waste time. They're screwing it up. I blinked. Be specific. The new adhesive, the one you built. W88. The batches are wrong. Smells off. Bond time's unpredictable. Half of R&D doesn't even know what shear thinning is. I said nothing. They're trying to re-engineer it, she continued. But all they have are partial logs and a couple of redacted printouts. The full chain reaction data, gone. Of course it was, because it had never been written down. You didn't leave anything, did you? She asked. I took a sip of my coffee. Wasn't asked. Brenda exhaled. They're in over their heads. Mason's trying to modernize the formula. Lean chemistry, smart polymers, all the jargon. But the real world isn't a TED Talk, and this product wasn't built on buzzwords. She paused. I think they're going to blame you. The first incident came 5 days later. A turbine blade in Iowa, delaminated mid-rotation. No injuries, thank God. But the contractor pulled the rest of the order and demanded a refund. 3 days after that, a supplier in Arizona reported adhesive separation on structural beams. $2 million in potential damage within 2 weeks. 6 major clients froze their contracts. I watched it unfold the way you watch a dam crack from a safe distance. The headlines were small at first. As Weston's flagship adhesive failing in the field. Engineering Forum questions new W88 stability. CEO promises transparency amid performance concerns. Then came the Reddit thread, then TikTok, then the lawsuits. They spun their wheels, blamed humidity, equipment, the pandemic. One exec said the formula may be reacting to changes in global resin, whatever that meant. It never occurred to them that they had simply cut the only person who actually understood the damn product. Brenda called again. They're panicking now. They found a test batch labeled "not these numbers" and thought it was a decoy. I smiled. It was. She snorted. You're a savage. No, I was silent. There's a difference. The funny thing is, I never wanted revenge. I just wanted them to respect the work. To respect what it takes to hold a product together. What it costs to keep people safe with something no one ever sees, something as invisible as glue. But they didn't respect it. So I left, and I took the soul of the product with me. They thought I was gone, but the truth is, I was watching. And when the right moment came, I was going to show them what it meant to fire the foundation. The blame game. The headline didn't surprise me. Internal memo suggests former chemist may be responsible for adhesive failures. There was no photo. Just a grainy company badge image, likely pulled from an outdated HR file. But the name was mine. First and last, Alina Price. The article quoted anonymous sources, claiming documentation gaps, poor knowledge transfer, and a legacy culture of overprotectiveness. The subtext wasn't subtle. I hadn't shared the formula because I was either incompetent or malicious. They wanted to make me look like a threat, not because I was dangerous, because I was right. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a cease and desist. I didn't write a Medium post or film a tearful response video in soft lighting. I just sat on my porch, held the newspaper in my hands, and felt something old press against my chest like a familiar weight. I'd felt it before. The first time I was passed over for promotion. The time a junior researcher took credit for a breakthrough I'd spent a year shaping. The dozens of meetings where I was the only woman at the table, and somehow still the one taking notes. I remembered what it felt like to bite my tongue, to smile through the erasure, to shrink myself down to keep my seat. But I also remembered something else. The moment I stopped needing their table, the emails started trickling in later that day. One from a former intern, another from a supplier, a quiet whisper from someone in procurement. They all said the same thing. We know what they're doing. We see it. We see you. It should have made me feel vindicated. But it didn't exactly, because what I felt wasn't victory. It was grief. Not for the job. Not even for the product. But for the version of myself who spent 2 decades believing that loyalty was enough. That if I just kept my head down, did the work, avoided politics, the system would eventually reward me. But systems don't reward devotion. They reward visibility. And I had been invisible by design. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine and a legal pad. My hands moved before my thoughts did. Raditives. Chain reactions. Notes on how to make the original formula stronger, safer, even cleaner. The knowledge hadn't faded, it had deepened. And for the first time since I left Weston, I asked myself the question that had been quietly growing in the back of my mind. What if I built something new? Not for them, not for revenge. For me. For the people who would never get a seat at the table unless someone like me built a better one. But I hesitated. because I knew how these stories usually ended. A woman steps out of the shadows. They call her bitter, call her ungrateful, say she's burning things down just to feel powerful. It didn't matter if she was right. It mattered how loud she was. And I had spent most of my life being quiet, controlled, exact, but maybe that was the problem. Because being quiet had made me precise. Being quiet had made me effective. But it had also made me invisible. And now, my silence had been weaponized against me. They thought it was weakness. But I was starting to realize silence is a scalpel, and I was done using it to cut myself. It was time to use it for something else. Something surgical. Something sharp. Something that cut them. I picked up my phone, scrolled down to a contact I hadn't touched in years. A mentor, a friend, a man who had once told me that genius in corporate America is like gold in the ocean. Too heavy to float, too dangerous to let sink. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. Are you still building? There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. Only when the world gives me a reason. I gave him one. It's time. What remains after silence? The lab was smaller than I remembered. Not the old lab. That was still at Weston, sterilized and probably renamed after some executive's child. This one was different. Quiet. Clean, no corporate logos. Just brushed steel counters, rows of equipment, and a faint chemical tang in the air that hit me like nostalgia. Daniel met me at the door. His hair was grayer than the last time we worked together, and he moved like a man who didn't rush for anyone anymore. His eyes held the same quiet calculation I remembered from a decade ago. He didn't ask how I was. He just said, "Whenever you're ready." That mattered more than I expected. The truth was, I wasn't ready. Not really. Not because I didn't remember how to do the work. That part came back the second I touched the beaker. My hands had their own memory. They knew the weight of every additive, the smell of a compound half a percentage too rich. But I had spent so long inside a system that minimized me. I didn't know how to move in a space that didn't. There was no manager breathing down my neck, no quarterly review, no intern waiting for me to explain again why pH drift wasn't just a number but a symptom. And that freedom scared me. Because in its absence, I couldn't blame anyone anymore. If I failed now, it would be mine alone. Daniel gave me space. He set up a bench, stocked it with exactly what I needed, and left me alone for the rest of the day. I moved slowly at first, checking everything twice. Then a third time. I wasn't being cautious. I was trying to remember how it felt to trust my own instincts. I didn't speak for hours. Didn't need to. The formula was taking shape again, piece by piece. Not a copy of what I built at Weston. Something better, cleaner, less volatile. The kind of compound you build when you don't have to ask permission. By dusk, I had 4 pages of notes and a headache pressing behind my eyes. But I also had something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging, not to company, not to a product, to myself. That night, I sat in the guest apartment above the lab and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Because beneath the quiet pride of building again, there was something else. Grief. I wasn't grieving Weston. I was grieving the time I'd spent believing it mattered more than I did. Grieving the years I'd handed to people who couldn't even pronounce half the chemicals I worked with. Grieving the woman I had been, loyal, brilliant, and convinced that being essential would keep me safe. It didn't. And that truth, more than any lawsuit or leaked memo, was the thing that kept me awake. I had trusted the system to reward the work. It had only rewarded proximity to power. And now I understood why so many women like me had vanished without a trace. Not because they lacked brilliance, but because they ran out of patience. Daniel knocked once before entering the apartment. He held 2 mugs of coffee and didn't say anything as he handed me one. He just sat. Eventually, I asked what he was thinking. He said, "You look like someone deciding whether to build a formula or a bomb. Maybe I'm doing both." He smiled, not unkindly. "Good. That means you're finally in control." By morning, I had a new list, not just of ingredients, but of boundaries, of what I would never hand over again. Not for stock options, not for a title, not even for credit. because the world had already tried to erase me once. It would not get a second chance. The email arrived at 20:19 a.m., no subject line. No sender name I recognized. I almost deleted it without opening. But something stopped me. I clicked. The message was short. I know what they did. I know what they're saying. And I know it wasn't you. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. If you're willing to talk, I'll meet you anywhere. Signed, Melissa. The name hit like a soft bruise. Not pain, but pressure. A reminder. Melissa from compliance. She'd been quiet, efficient, always early to meetings and the last to speak. We weren't close, but she'd been there, in the same rooms, watching the same silence. And now she was breaking hers. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it, turned the message over in my head like a shard of glass. Not sure if it was meant to help or cut, because I wanted to believe her. But I'd seen too much. Too many people who watched it happen. Too many who whispered support behind closed doors but said nothing when the blade fell. Still, I replied. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Riverside Cafe. Come alone. She wrote back 3 minutes later. I'll be there. I arrived early. The cafe was half empty, all wood and steam and soft jazz that sounded like regret. I chose a table near the back, facing the door. Melissa walked in 5 minutes early, coat unbuttoned, dark circles under her eyes. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just diminished. She spotted me and came over, sat without waiting to be invited. Thank you for this. I nodded but said nothing. She ordered tea. Her hands shook as she stirred it. I wasn't brave. Back then, I should have said something. I let her speak. They told us you were being transitioned out. Strategic restructuring. The usual language. But I knew. Everyone did. You weren't just another chemist. You were the product. Then why didn't anyone stop it? She looked down. Because we all thought someone else would. That landed. Not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. She continued, softer now. It didn't feel real until everything started falling apart. The recalls, the contracts pulled, the press. And Tyler, her face twisted like she tasted metal. He's drowning. But he'll never admit it. Half his team quit. Legal is circling. The board's looking for a scapegoat, and your name keeps coming up in whispers. The story is being rewritten. I'm aware. She looked at me for a long time. What are you building? I didn't answer. You don't have to tell me. I just want you to know. Whatever it is, it matters. Because they're afraid, not just of what they lost, but of what you might do next. We sat in silence for a while. Her tea went cold. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. But I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Conviction. She reached into her bag, pulled out a USB stick. Internal audit notes. Nothing damning, but you'll see who pushed what. Who signed off? Who stayed quiet? Why are you giving me this? Because I stayed quiet too long. And I don't want to be part of the cover-up anymore. I took it. Not because I needed proof. Because I needed to remember that even silence could shift. That even a whisper, in the right place, could shake a wall. As I walked back to the lab, I felt the old weight again. But this time I carried it differently. Not as shame, as fuel. Because this wasn't just about what they took. It was about what I would take back. And I wasn't building a formula anymore. I was building a reckoning. The lab was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that buzzed under your skin, like something was waiting to happen. The prototype compound sat in the pressure chamber, sealed behind triple glass and steel. My notes were done. Ratios finalized. There was nothing left to tweak. No decimals to doubt. Just the countdown. Thermal stress test in 60 seconds. Daniel stood nearby, arms crossed, watching me the way only someone who knew your tempo could. He didn't say anything. He knew better. Because this part wasn't chemistry. It was confrontation. Not with the product, with the past. 60 seconds to prove that everything they threw away was still inside me. 50 seconds, I looked down at my hands. Scarred, dry, a little stiff from the cold. But steady. 40 seconds. I'd spent half my career building something perfect. And the rest pretending it didn't hurt when they took it. 30. They called it streamlining. I called it erasure. 20. They replaced me with someone who couldn't tell the difference between cohesion and charisma. 10. This formula wasn't a comeback, it was proof that I was never obsolete. I hit the ignition, the chamber roared. Heat surged past the stress threshold in seconds. The compound held, it didn't blister, didn't flake, didn't fail, it flexed. It adapted, it survived. Daniel let out a slow breath, almost reverent. It worked. It didn't just work, it excelled. The numbers beat every known standard. Faster cure, higher tensile, low volatility, even eco-certifiable under EU compliance metrics. This wasn't a formula. It was a signature, and it had my name on it. Then the knock came. Not from the hallway, from the lobby. Daniel glanced at the security monitor, then back at me. You're not going to like this. He was right, I didn't. Because standing there, wearing a suit 2 sizes too ambitious, was Thomas Keene, Weston's former director of development. My old boss. The one who smiled while handing me my severance envelope. He'd flown across state lines, without an appointment, which meant he wasn't here for a conversation. He was here for surrender. I didn't move. Daniel waited. You want me to send him away? I almost said yes, but something inside me twisted no. Let him in. If he came to watch me crawl, he should see what standing looks like. Thomas walked into the lab like he still owned it. Looked around like he expected to recognize something. He didn't. Everything was different. Everything was mine. Elena, he started, voice warm. Too warm. You look well. I didn't answer. He continued. We've been following your work. Quietly, of course. And I wanted to offer something off the record. I stared. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. Compensation. Partnership, maybe. IP recognition. We'd love to rebuild what was lost. I didn't blink. You didn't lose anything, Thomas. You threw it away. His smile tightened. Things got out of hand. I'll admit that. But we're prepared to make it right. Are you? He hesitated. Because making it right doesn't mean buying what you already broke. It means admitting you broke it, and watching someone else build something better without you. He set the envelope on the counter. Just think about it. No, I said, and picked up the compound sample, because I already have. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak again. I turned my back and walked away. Daniel didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because he saw it too. The shift. This wasn't just chemistry anymore. This was momentum. And we had it. 2 days after Thomas left the lab, the retaliation began. It didn't come as a cease and desist. That would have been too honest. It came as shadows. Anonymous tips to journalists suggesting I'd stolen proprietary data. A rumor leaked on industry forums, subtle but poisonous, that I'd sabotaged Weston's archive out of spite. Then came the burner Twitter account posting out of context photos from my past projects with captions like, repackaging the old as new. By the end of the week, an official complaint had been filed with the Intellectual Property Arbitration Board. Weston was accusing me of corporate theft. Daniel slammed the folder down on the table. They're not even being creative. I skimmed the document. The language was surgical, nothing personal, just alleged misconduct, unauthorized replication, material similarity. Translation, we couldn't build it ourselves, so we're going to bury you in red tape until you fold. They think I'll back down. Do they know who you are? I don't think they ever did. He leaned forward, jaw set. We can fight this. We have timestamps, lab data, witnesses. No, his head snapped up. We don't defend, we expose. I stood, heart slow and deliberate. Because fear wasn't useful anymore. I knew their game. I'd trained half the people now pulling the strings. I knew how they documented, where they cut corners, what they hid behind polished slides and compliance language. If they wanted war, I'd show them what a real offensive looked like. That night, I drafted a letter. Not to Weston. To every contractor they ever sold adhesive to. Construction, defense, aviation, all the clients who'd been burned, literally and figuratively, by Weston's failing product. I laid out the timeline, the severance, the disappearance of the original formula. the so-called replacement that crumbled under heat and pressure. I attached Daniel's verified lab reports. And at the bottom, I added one sentence. I didn't destroy Weston's product. I simply took back what was mine. We sent the letter under my name, no lawyers, no PR firm, just truth. By morning, it had leaked, and the media pounced. Engineer behind Stickygate speaks out. It was never theirs. Whistleblower chemist reveals what really happened at Weston Materials. David Viss. Goliath in a lab coat. Elena Rivera's fight against corporate theft. I didn't hide. I gave interviews. Spoke plainly. Didn't throw insults. Didn't gloat. I let the science speak. Let the silence of Weston's counterargument scream its own guilt. Their stock dropped 12% in 3 days. But that wasn't the win. The win was when Midstate Industrial called Daniel. We want to meet, face to face. The meeting happened in a quiet suite above a trade conference. No logos, no press. Just 4 people in a room, 2 from Midstate, 1 from our side, and me. They brought charts, projections, legal disclaimers. But they didn't talk numbers first. They asked me a question. What would it take to move production? I looked them in the eye. Full control of the process. My formula, my oversight, my terms, and credit. No more invisibility. They nodded. We can do that evening standing on the hotel balcony. Daniel handed me a glass of red wine. It's happening, he said. Yes, I said, but not fast. It doesn't have to be fast. It just has to be real. We toasted, not to revenge, to reclamation. Because the real win wasn't the headlines. It was knowing that this time when the world stuck together, it would be because of me. The cease and desist arrived at 8:04 a.m. sharp. Perfectly timed. Just late enough to ruin your coffee. Just early enough to ruin your day. Daniel read it first. Weston's legal team had filed for an emergency injunction to halt production of Horizon 88, citing ongoing intellectual property disputes and risk of market confusion. We had 5 days to respond. I didn't flinch. They were playing defense now. The panic was showing. But the real damage wasn't the letter. It was the intern. Her name was Mia. Smart. Polished. Top of her class at Caltech. Said she'd admired my work for years. Quoted old interviews. Even brought a notepad to take handwritten notes. Too perfect. I noticed it in the way she asked questions. Slightly off. Too focused on the molecular structure, the chemical ratios. Not the method, not the behavior of the bond. She wasn't trying to learn, she was trying to map. Daniel didn't see it at first. He was distracted, handling media, lawyers, vendors. But I'd spent 27 years training assistants, and 27 years watching some of them try to cut corners, to cut ahead, to cut me out. This wasn't new, but it was personal. 3 days in, I tested her. Left a decoy folder on the shared drive. Titled it, Revision 5 Unstable Cure Cycle. Inside were spreadsheets with deliberately skewed values. All plausible, all subtly wrong. 12 hours later, Weston filed an addendum to their injunction with details that only appeared in that folder. Daniel's jaw dropped. They've planted someone. I already know who. He looked at me. What do? We finished the job. That night, I stayed alone in the lab. Ran a final series of real tests. Triple confirmed the bond integrity. Adjusted the thermal range. Recorded the behavior across 5 substrates. It worked. It was better than anything I'd built before. I encrypted the files, burned a master copy onto physical media, and placed it, unlabeled, in a fireproof lockbox in Daniel's office. Then I wrote a message, to Mia. Left it taped to the underside of her workbench. It said, I built this with my bare hands. What have you ever built? The next day she was gone. No resignation. No goodbye. Her ID badge was left on the front desk. And a week later, a story leaked. Not ours, Weston's. A rushed press release about a breakthrough adhesive. Photos of a lab, a blurry beaker, and one critical sentence. We've recovered the legacy compound. Now modernized for the next generation. Except every chemist who read it knew what it really was. Desperation. And then the real hammer dropped. Midstate Industrial announced an exclusive supply contract with us. 5 years. Full distribution, NDA locked. Daniel looked at the signed contract and whistled. That's game. No, I said. That's check. Game comes later. The day we launched Horizon 88, I didn't wear a lab coat. I wore black. Stood in front of a press conference with my hair pulled back, my eyes steady, and I told the truth about the formula, about Weston, about what happens when people mistake quiet for weak. The room didn't applaud. They stood. Because every engineer, every chemist, every woman who'd ever been talked over or replaced or erased saw the same thing in my eyes. Not revenge. Reclamation. Weston's injunction was dropped within the month. Their recovered compound was revealed to be unstable. Clients withdrew, investors fled, Brent resigned, and somewhere in their abandoned R&D office, someone finally said it out loud, we should have never let her go. But by then, it didn't matter, because I was already building something else. And this time, no one was getting their hands on it but me. It came in the form of a private flight, a beige envelope, and a handshake too firm to be sincere. Department of Energy, Infrastructure Task Force, Joint Federal Oversight Committee. 3 suits, 1 message. We need your compound? Daniel raised an eyebrow. I just stared. They called it an opportunity to serve the country. I called it a grab. They offered a licensing deal. Generous, clean, government-backed. Unlimited expansion. Distribution to aerospace defense disaster recovery. They promised control, credit, my name etched into legislation if I wanted it. And buried inside it all was the one thing that always follows power leverage. They didn't want to use Horizon 88. They wanted to own it. Even if my name stayed on the formula, the decisions wouldn't. I could feel it already. Layers of approval committees, budget constraints, quietly swapped ingredients, politics wrapped in safety protocol. I'd spent 3 decades watching men like this burn the work of people like me and call it optimization. Now they wanted to do it again. But not unless I let them. Daniel watched me carefully across the room as I held the folder. His voice was low, steady. It's your call. All of it. And that was the problem. I knew what would happen if I said no. Bridges would continue failing. Turbine blades cracking. Emergency shelters without proper sealant. Real people would suffer. All because I wanted to keep my grip on what was mine. But if I said yes, they'd chip away at the edges until Horizon 88 was just another product. I hadn't fought this hard just to be consulted. So I asked one question. Do I keep full production oversight? The man across from me blinked. Would strongly recommend advisory status. Strategic input. That was code for sit quietly while we gut it. I closed the folder. Then I stood. This isn't a legacy formula. This is a living thing. You don't leash it. You either respect it or you lose it. They stared at me like I'd slapped them. Daniel grinned. I didn't stay for the response. That night, on the roof of our new lab, I looked out over the city lights. Daniel joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. We turned them down. They'll come back, he said. They always do. I know. What are you going to do? I exhaled. Something I never got to do before. Choose. 2 months passed. And then, quietly, I made a move no one expected. I created a new company. Small, independent, no investors, no boardroom, just a lab, 6 staffers I trusted, and a clean contract. We wouldn't sell the formula. We'd sell the solution. Bespoke adhesive blends, case by case, crafted on site by our team, with full oversight, uncompromised by bureaucracy. We didn't go public. We didn't chase headlines. We became a ghost kitchen for engineering miracles. The waiting list grew. So did the whispers. And every now and then, I'd get a letter from a woman in another lab, another industry, saying, I saw what you did. Now I know what I can do. In the end, Weston collapsed. Asset sale, merger with a packaging supplier. Brent faded into some minor VC firm with no photos on the website. Their name disappeared. Mine didn't, because when you build something that actually holds, people remember. Not the company, the hands. And this time, I kept mine open just enough for the people who knew how to build, not steal. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet. If I'd just taken the severance, smiled through the exit interview, and let the suits repurpose my life's work into a line item on a spreadsheet. That's what they wanted. For me to leave quietly. For my story to end as a footnote in someone else's success. But here's the thing about foundations. When you build something strong enough, long enough, deep enough, it doesn't crack when the surface is stripped. It resists. It remembers. I wasn't the formula. I was the fire that created it. They thought they could replace me with youth polish and buzzwords. But they forgot what real value looks like. It smells like acetone and steel. It sounds like silence that chooses not to speak until it has to. And it feels like calloused hands steady under pressure. They fired me quietly. So I rebuilt loudly, not with press releases, but with proof, not with revenge, but with results, not with fear, but with freedom. And when they tried to rewrite history, I didn't fight for credit. I just built something they couldn't copy. Because they never understood. The knowledge wasn't in the documents. It was in me. If you've ever been underestimated, passed over, erased, this story was for you. If you've ever sat in a boardroom, wondering why you had to explain your own brilliance to someone who couldn't even pronounce your title, you already know the ending. And if you're still fighting, still building, still holding the glue together in silence, you're the hero they won't see coming. Not yet, but they will. They always do. This is Telling Story with me. If this story lit something in you, like it, share it, subscribe for more. Because sometimes revenge isn't a scream, it's a blueprint. With your name signed at the bottom, and the world's foundation balanced in your hands. We'll see you in the next story.